I've worked on movies like Transformers, movies like Pacific Rim, movies like Ninja Turtles, a lot of the Avengers movies. My name is Giang. I am a concept artist for film, video games, toys, all that good stuff. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a drawing of Trapjaw from Masters of the Universe and do a modern interpretation and kind of see where it takes me. So I kind of already done a rough drawing underneath here. So all I'm doing is what I call like a design pass, playing up some of our sort of more fun details. What I often try to do too is when I'm creating some of the characters and their looks, I'm trying to keep in mind not only what looks cool, but I'm trying to infuse any sort of what I would say narrative as much as possible. I know that's sometimes tough to do, but I think with certain characters too, even if you can dress them in certain ways and kind of give their outfits a certain look and things like that, what I like to call you're developing their visual archaeology. What that means is saying, okay, if a character is wearing certain clothing or they have certain gear and things like that, that kind of gives a certain indication as to what the history of that character is, and that subtly kind of gives you some sort of story behind the character as well too. So, you know, it's not only just kind of making things look cool. Part of this process too is that we're also kind of playing to what I call the legacy of the character. So oftentimes too, there is obviously with like a character like from Masters of the Universe, there's already like an established sort of look and feel. There's a lot of things to keep in mind in terms of like when you're developing a character, especially for film, is obviously what the producers and the directors are looking for, but there's also an opportunity to kind of keep in mind what the character stands for in terms of the fan base and what they've fallen in love with, and to some degree trying to stay true to that, right? But also create something new. There's times too when certain mediums work well for characters, like animation or something like that, or like a video game. But when we translate into film, I think regardless of how much a lot of fans do like work, sometimes that doesn't translate as easy as we would like. So what we're going to try to do is try to strike a happy medium with all that. And another thing that I like to do too is I think that, and this might be controversial to some people, but what I like to do is also at this stage, what our responsibilities are as a concept artist is also kind of like experiment too, because I think there's always those sort of like tried and true what the characters are, and we can kind of just play those angles and it would theoretically work out fine. But also too, I think there's also an opportunity to kind of surprise people too, because I think it's nice to kind of say, okay, well, even though we have a character that we already know what the look is and how we want that to play out, I think there's also opportunities to say, okay, well, let's take it in a different direction and let's try to have some contrast to what we think it might be, so that ultimately at the end of the day, it might be a pleasant surprise for everyone. So a big reason why I also chose this opportunity to work on Trapjaw is because I'm a bit of a gearhead too, so I love doing anything that has to do with like mechanics, and with his mechanical arm here, I'll sort of play that up. And with mechanics, it's one of those things where it's like, I think everyone kind of thinks, well, okay, let's just do machinery. But I think even machinery has its sort of own visual language and visual archaeology too. So like in the instance of, let's say for this character, maybe because of his deformations with his jaw and all that stuff, maybe what he's trying to do with other parts of his body, let's just say, is he's trying to beautify him. So like instead of doing a more industrial look that I think that would be a no-brainer to take this character in, like maybe we'll do a more Art Nouveau. He's trying to really kind of like, again, sort of make himself pretty in other instances and things like that. But who knows if that's working or not. It just kind of looks kind of comical at the end of the day. And the other thing I like to do, especially when I'm doing designs, is keep in mind what we're trying to do with the aesthetic appeal of our characters and our designs, but also play up real world sort of like feasible functionality we can inherently kind of imbue into the designs. We don't, I always like to say we're not engineers. What we're trying to do is create, compelling designs, and sometimes it can be so fantastical that it doesn't feel feasible, and we're trying to always strike that happy medium. At least I am. So introducing things like on this sort of like big arm mechanism is exhaust pipes or something like that to kind of say, hey, where is kind of, he's spewing out some of this exhaust smoke and things like that. So I've always loved concept design. I loved looking at artists like Ralph McQuarrie, Joe Johnston's work on Star Wars, and all those guys, Doug Chiang, were heroes of mine. And I loved watching the movies, but also what I loved seeing from the movies was also like the things that we didn't see, right? The possible ideas. And that kind of artwork has always kind of inspired me to kind of think about what happens behind the scenes. And I've always wanted to break into, that scene. And I was trained as a graphic designer, actually. So, doing a lot of like websites and, business card branding type work. And I was doing that in, from the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. And, that's all going good. I loved it and everything like that. But I also wanted to pursue that dream of getting into concept art. And so, I thought one way to kind of get my work out was, maybe doing like conventions, Comic Cons and, that sort of thing. So I had gone and done a convention out in Oakland, actually, Oakland, California, and it was not a good show. It was, there was no one there. I was about to pack it up. But some guys were, across the aisle looking at some attendees were looking at some toys and things like that. And they kept looking over at my work and they came over finally and they were like just chatting. They were super cool dudes and they were like, we love your art. What do you want to do and all that stuff? And I was like, well, I'd love to get into like a Lucasfilm or, Pixar or something like that at some point. And they're like, well, we're from Lucasfilm and things like that. So it kind of just went from there. I got really lucky. I often say, put your work out there, be at the right place at the right time, and you never know what's going to happen. So I was very fortunate. When an opening opened up in the art department at ILM, I took it. But it was also a struggle too, still at that point, because we, even though it was a PA position in the art department, so it wasn't like you're automatically given the opportunity to work on these big multi-million-dollar budgeted movies. But I was around all those great artists and getting influenced by them and getting a lot of mentorship from them. So it was an invaluable experience. But ultimately about a month in, I started working on the first Iron Man movie. So that was a lot of fun and scary at the same time. I think the ability to kind of understand the bigger picture, I think that sometimes us as artists will kind of get wrapped up in the minutia of stuff like I'm doing here and getting wrapped up in our sort of like what we would like to see in terms of art or style or even like what I'm doing here, which is interpreting a character and how I think he should be interpreted. When you're working in a bigger company as well as working for a company that essentially is a vendor for other various studios and all that stuff, is that you're understanding that you're a piece of a puzzle that has to try to fit into a bigger scope, but at the same time, you should still be producing inspired work. That doesn't mean that you're just another cog. It means that they're looking to us to kind of produce work that will be aesthetically pleasing, will have an emotional sort of resonance and speak to people, but still at the same time, I'm always amazed that when we're working with a studio, we're working on a movie, and it's not only us in terms of the visual effects studio that's working on it, it's a bunch of other companies and a bunch of other studios too. So there's a lot of sort of like stylistic wrangling that happens, but I think that ultimately too, if the audience doesn't see that there's big changes going on, I think that's a win-win for everybody. I think the biggest part for me, and I think that the aspect of all this that can't be so visually demonstrated, is the research part of it. I do a lot of research, and what I like to pride myself on is speaking to clients and in terms of like finding out what their objectives and what their goals are, because I think that's kind of the most important thing, is to understand those things. We can kind of just go off and do the work, but I think it's important to kind of have a dialogue, find out what the goals are, and then I do a lot of research, and I have a lot of my own reference libraries and things like that to kind of help inform the design as much as possible, so that it doesn't just feel like it's something that's thrown together, and it's something that feels like it might be something that fits within the realms of the movie and also in the design itself as a singular piece too. Thank you for checking out my real quick process here, guys, and hope you found it informative. I'm always willing to help too with developing and mentoring artists, so if there's any of our questions and emails, feel free to check me out online. My name is Giang, and I just did a quick little Trapjaw redesign here from Masters of the Universe. If you want to check out more of my work, go check it out at www.orbitalharvest.com.